everyone, and welcome to another episode of Home Tech. I'm Seth Johnson, joined as always by Jason Griffin. Jason, how's it going, man?
It's going great, Seth. Busy week. Big update for you and the Home Tech audience. My wife and I are excited to announce that we are officially under contract, so we don't quite own a home here in Denver yet, but we're getting close, and so we're very excited about that. It's a tough market here, a lot of competition, and so we're excited to be moving forward.
It's exciting. It's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to being able to take on some projects after the dust settles a little bit. Obviously, there'll be a little bit of a lag time there while I get situated, but definitely look forward to sharing, as you did when you got into your current house, some of the smart home decisions that I'll eventually be making in that home, and we'll look forward to documenting that on the show.
Are you going to try and do like some remodel work, or is it just going to be like move-in ready?
Yeah,
hopefully?
No, it's move-in ready, thankfully, which is big for us. We've got our young daughter, and as most of our listeners probably know already, a second one on the way, due here in August. So we really that was important to us to find a home that was move-in ready. There are a few little things that I feel like we can do over time to hopefully add our own little touch to the home, but nothing that needs to be done right away, thankfully.
That's always good.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
It'd be like me and take 4 months to move in.
Yeah, we don't quite have that luxury here. So.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So interesting show tonight. We had Alex Nigg on, who is a gentleman who does something really cool with his Airbnb properties. He actually integrates home automation into them.
Yeah.
So and to help out the guests and help him remotely manage it from thousands of miles away.
Yeah. It was a really interesting conversation. Alex has his own app as well, targeted at that Airbnb audience called Properly. And really, we touched on that briefly, but what we really focused on, what I thought was the interesting story that you alluded to, was his very creative use of DIY smart home products to enhance his guests' visit and even more importantly, to enhance his own ability to manage that property remotely. And I thought there was some very interesting takeaways there for anyone who's interested in the smart home, because if you can use this technology in a really utility way that's useful and adds value to something that you're doing, I mean, I think that's really the goal, right? We talk about the smart home all the time, and a lot of it can sometimes seem like bells and whistles and just fun toys, but he's really found a way to put these devices to a very creative and beneficial use. And so I really enjoyed our conversation with him. So be sure you stay tuned for that. That's coming up here in a little bit. As usual, we're going to touch on a few news stories here before we jump into our interview with Alex. And before we even get into the news, we wanted to do a quick follow-up. We had an episode a couple of weeks ago where we really did a deep dive into some DIY smart home platforms. And these were, I would say, the more robust platforms when we talk about DIY, not really the point solutions, but more the comprehensive home automation platforms. And Seth, I think you had a couple of platforms that sort of came to light, or software solutions that had been pointed out to you after the show that we didn't get into our episode, and we wanted to touch on briefly here.
Yeah. Actually, there was a Reddit thread that had our link to our show on it, and there was a couple of guys that posted in there and said, "Hey, you forgot this one. You forgot this one." One of them came up. It was Charmed Quark, CQC. Which, when I put it in there, you're like, "Hey, I know that name."
Yeah. That's one that's been around for a while, and I have to be honest, I didn't leave it out on purpose. I had actually heard about that one years ago, and I know that one's been out for quite a while. I wasn't aware that it was still humming along, but it sounds like it is.
Yeah, and I mean, I gotta say, out of all the ones we listed, I mean, so this is a paid software. I think they start at $199 and go up. I believe you can get in and really customize the interface. These guys actually have a dealer program, so I swear I've seen these guys like at CEDIA or even way back at the EH Expo, which was I believe in Orlando and a couple of other places. They would have that.
Yeah.
So these guys go way back. They've got a ton of integrations. Like, it's a very mature and I would say stable platform at this point. So if that's your thing, look into that too. Another one we missed was Castle OS, which I had heard of before, but not really looked into. It looks like a very interesting DIY product. But it starts a little bit higher. They've got a hub Sorry, just do that real quick.
Get that out of the way.
Yeah, starts at $4.99, and but they sell the product. They sell it, they support it. So these guys, we'll probably reach out and have them on the show one of these days, because I think it's a really interesting product, and at the same time, the interface and everything looks really good. So I don't know. I got to dig more into these. These two just came up. I haven't had time to really do a deep dive like I did on the other ones.
Right.
Especially since they either cost money or there's a way to demo them. Charmed Cork, I know you can demo, but I want to take a look at them a little bit more. I think maybe we'll be talking about these more later in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show you the amount of different options there are out there, and we, I think, tried to do a very thorough job on our roundup episode and got to a number of them. But I'm sure even with these two mentioned now, there are still others that we've missed and haven't gotten to, and really just highlights the point that there's quite a few options out there when you're getting into the smart home, and it can be very difficult. And unfortunately, there is no clear-cut one answer as to which platform or software or service is going to be the best for you. It's really just one of those things you got to dig in and do some evaluation. So glad we got to follow up on those. I want to move on here. We had a story break this week, and in what's sort of another follow-up point, we had a few weeks ago put out a poll on our Twitter handle at HomeTech Podcast, where I had asked our followers to vote in this poll about who they thought the first kind of established CI company would be to have official, supported, sanctioned Amazon Alexa support. And at the time, if I'm recalling correctly, Control4 won. We had quite a few votes on that, so a lot of people got involved in taking that poll. And Lutron was on there and had come in, I think, a close second. They were my vote. That was my prediction, and it turns out that Lutron is the first. We saw the story break this week. Now, I will say there's a caveat, and we talked about this on previous episodes, where Control4 does have the ability. There are ways to make it work with like third-party drivers and things like that, but this is really the first company now of the major CI companies that's come out with that support. We've also talked about Wirestorm has the Inato platform, so kind of a smaller company that doesn't quite have the footprint of a Lutron, but there are other companies doing it. I just thought this was interesting and goes back to that point we've been really making about Lutron in the 2 years we've been doing the show, is that they just seem to be right on top of it all the time and getting out in front of all these latest trends. And so I say hats off to them.
Yeah, this was a cool story, especially on the heels of Amazon announcing, we talked about in the previous week, that they would be extending their integrations into the home automation space through Alexa. So they're in beta right now, these new APIs that they're pushing out, but it'll make the skills or the skill sets that Alexa has a lot closer to the end user. So basically, you use more natural language to control your home, which is going to be huge, especially for companies like Lutron, Hue, and Nest, and all that. Like they'll all have these first party integrations. I mean, eventually Control4, I would assume, right? You'd have Control4 in there. You'd have and maybe some other CI companies will get involved with that, but it'll be a lot easier for those integrations to happen, and then with the end user or whoever's using the Alexa in the home, they'll be able to just speak naturally to it and turn on lights, or it'd be awesome in my kitchen if I had this integrated with the Control4 system I have at the house. Say, hey, turn on the under counter lights so I can see what I'm doing in task lights, and see what I'm doing in the kitchen, and it would do that because that's a separate load in my kitchen. That'd be great. So I'm looking forward to that day. Hopefully it's soon.
Yeah. I don't think you'll have too much longer to wait, and I think, like we've alluded to here, I think having a company like Lutron getting out there and getting those integrations in place is a great thing and an exciting advancement, I would say. Let's move on to another story here. This was a big one in sort of the business world of home technology and the smart home, and that is Nortec, which is obviously a very large company, has bought a 25% stake in Mios, and Mios is the company behind the Vera line of products. So a fairly well-known name in the smart home. And Seth, I believe you had some thoughts on this story that you wanted to share.
Yeah, last week I was wrapping up the Elan training, And we were sitting in the class, maybe on the first day, and he mentioned something about using the Vera lights for Z-Wave integration, because Vera uses Z-Wave, has a pretty deep integration with it. So we got into like the second or third day. I can't really remember. It all kind of blends together after a while, but they started saying that in the future, Elan would be using these Vera lights to integrate with Z-Wave door locks and lighting and all that good stuff. At the same time, like the very same day, a news story came out saying that Nortech, which is the parent company Elan, in Core Brands, said that they're going to buy 25% stake. So this makes a whole lot of sense to me as to why a company like Elan would get in and use something that works really well with Z-Wave and integrates. Maybe they'll have a tighter integration path with them in the future. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool. This is really great, I think, for the Mios company and the Vera product line, because it's going to allow. I mean, this is a big company. This is Nortech we're talking about. This isn't like a startup, right?
Right.
This is real money we're talking. And if they're going to buy a stake in the company, hopefully they'll make sure that it keeps going along. After we did our roundup, the Vera devices that I looked at and that I've played with. I mean, this is the product that I said, this is the one to get if you want to get started, because it gets you going down a path. It's pretty easy to understand, and it integrates with Nest and Sonos and Z-Wave lighting.
Right.
But at the same time, it does things like this, where you can break it out and you can integrate with other platforms. If you wanted to have Castle OS, and get really nerdy and geeky, you could do not Castle OS, OpenHAB. You could really do that if you wanted to go with a Control4 system one day, but you had an investment in Z-Wave product. You can integrate those through the Vera. You just use that as another bridge, and the same thing with Elan. So I really think these guys are ones to watch. I mean, they're making some waves, and they're way off in the distance for some people, but I don't know. This product line and these this Vera, the Mios, MIOS, I guess that's My Home OS. I'm not sure. I think these are really ones to watch because of look at what's going on and how easy the product is to set up and use. It really is.
Yeah. Well, I would have to admit freely that I fall into that camp of people that you had mentioned, where this has been sort of off in the distance. I've known of Vera for years, and Elan and Nortech, and these are all names. Z-Wave as a technology, these are all names that are very familiar to me. But until this story broke, and I read a great friend of the show, Mike Wolf, over at nextmarket.co and of the Smart Home Show and Technology.fm, a very great guy to follow in the smart home, and he did, as he always does, has a great analysis of this deal, and I think I would encourage our listeners to go read it. If you're scratching your head and wondering, okay, is this a big deal? Is this something that I should be thinking about or paying attention to? Because that was frankly the position that I was in when I first heard about the story, and I read his piece on it. I thought it was very interesting. I think your take on it is very interesting as well. And I would agree. Seems like one to watch, and definitely a company now with this new partnership and funding that should have a lot of momentum.
Yep, just keep an eye on them. They're making some waves, and they're far off waves, so that they'll get bigger as time goes on. But I really think that this is one product and one company to keep an eye on, because if they get just even slightly better, it's going to be huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, well, we got one other story here before we jump into our interview with Alex Nigg, and that is a story out of URC, and this is a new home set. I would venture, Seth, to call it a home automation hub. Thank you.
Got that in.
Yeah, and we were talking about Z-Wave in the previous story, and Z-Wave obviously a very big technology in the DIY and kind of that security world, and this is a product that URC is putting out, and it's really targeted at security dealers. According to the CE Pro story, it's a $600 MSRP price point. You get a remote and a hub with that, and so you've basically what URC has done is opened up the door for, if you're a security integrator or a security company and you want to venture into doing some AV control or taking control of the media room, this would be a great platform to do that. URC, obviously a very well-established name. $600 MSRP is a very compelling price point. The device has Wi-Fi, IR. Obviously, it's got IR ports. There is a Z-Wave gateway. It's a extra piece of hardware, as is fairly common with these sort of things. So you do have the ability to integrate Z-Wave. You've got IP control of any device that URC has in their total control library or database. And it looks like it's able to do control up to 8 rooms. So pretty compelling offering at a $600 MSRP price point. And I think that URC is really a company that's been around for so long. Typically, the remotes that they put out, in my opinion, look pretty good. They do, I think, do a good job of designing them. I don't have a lot of direct experience installing them and programming them over the years. I've done a little bit and generally have had good experience. But by and large, I think that people seem to have good results with them, and I think this is a compelling looking product for the right segment of the market.
Yeah, they make good remotes. I mean, I've programmed hundreds of them over the last 10 years, and they make decent remotes. This kind of takes a little wind out of the sales of Control 4, who just released a product, the EA1. They're bundling it with their SR260 remote. For the same exact price point, $600, and this is essentially what is a home automation hub as well, that will integrate with many of the things that Control 4 could, and it also includes AV control. So I think this is pretty interesting for that price point. I thought Control 4 was going to come in and just lay waste to products like URC, because it doesn't make sense. Like, most of their remotes were already, $600, $700, $800. You could find but it only would control a single room. Like, you wouldn't be able to base your home automation off of it. This could do a little bit more, and it looks like it communicates out to cloud-based devices like Nest and that kind of thing too. Pretty interesting offering. I'd like to see where they go with it.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, I would say it represents a challenge for Savant too. Savant's got their new remote that's we're expected to finally start seeing shipping here very soon, and it just goes to show you that the market for inexpensive handheld remotes that also act as part of a larger ecosystem and tie into a small home automation hub is really maturing, and there's becoming an increasing number of options available. And I think it's exciting for anyone who is looking to get into doing home automation and home control and is still under the impression that it costs thousands upon thousands of dollars to do it, to bring it all into one ecosystem. And that's just simply not the case anymore. You could look at a device like this and get great control over your media room and surround sound room, and then tie it in with your Z-Wave lights, or put it together with any IP controllable device that URC supports, and you've got a pretty nice control system there that will do quite a bit for a very, very affordable price. And so I think it just really speaks to where the home technology market is going, and that proliferation that we're seeing of more inexpensive devices that are going to be targeted at a broader market.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the URC remotes. I've had many clients that say, I don't really like the feel of brand X remotes, and you hand them a URC and they go, oh yeah, I really like this. I'd rather use this. This gives them an option too, to have an entry level, low price point home automation system that can still do quite a bit. I mean, there's integrations with quite a bit here. They're saying Total Connect, Alarm.com, and let's see, I guess I'm sure Nest is on there as well. But with a Wi-Fi remote, you can do a lot of damage. So it should be interesting to see how this flushes out. Yeah, exactly. You got to say this isn't a DIY product. Unfortunately, it's using a lot of like DIY technology, but it's not you still got to go through the URC dealer network.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out. It is not going to be sold straight to consumers, so you will have to go through a URC dealer in order to get that. Well, Seth, without further ado, what do you say we jump into our interview here with Alex? Again, Alex is from a company called Properly, and mainly what we were talking to him about is his very creative use of smart home technology in his Airbnb business. And I think it was a fascinating conversation to take a look at what you can do with a lot of disparate point solutions when you put them together and use them creatively. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with Alex. Hey, Alex, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to join us. We are looking forward to the conversation, and we're going to jump in and talk about a lot of interesting stuff that you have going on with the smart home. And I really think that the way you've put a lot of these various smart home products to use is an interesting story, and I look forward to diving in and digesting that. But before we do so, why don't you give our audience just a brief personal introduction and maybe tell us a little bit about your background and interest in the smart home?
Yeah, sure. I'm a German-speaking Italian, so that's sort of a strange background, who came to the US via London. I've been a VC, I've been an investor in venture capital for most of my career, but I've always been a complete geek. I love gadgets, so my house is full of gadgets. And when that really started to make sense for me is about 2.5 years ago when I started hosting from my house via Airbnb. And as I wasn't at my house most of the time, I had to start thinking about how I can automate most of the things at my house and then how I can do that in such a way so it's very user-friendly so my guests can use it too. So that's a little bit of the background on how I ended up getting very interested in home automation.
Right. And I know right now you've got an initiative and a product aimed at that. You mentioned Airbnb, and you've got a product of your own aimed at that space. And why don't you give us the quick elevator pitch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a host on Airbnb, I'm a remote host, which means I only host at my house when I'm not there myself. The biggest problem for me was managing the turnovers, managing the cleaners. What happened is that because my house is almost always booked and so I have a very quickly changing schedule, I ended up with lots of different cleaners since I need a cleaner whenever I have a turnover. And my regular cleaner usually isn't available outside her sort of once a week slot. What that then necessitated was having a way of explaining to someone who's never been to my house what becomes a relatively complicated process. It typically takes 3.5 to 4 hours to turn over my place from one set of guests to the next. So to solve that problem, I created an app called Properly, and you can find it at getproperly.com, and it's free. That allows hosts and vacation rental owners and property managers to put together detailed visual checklists on how they would like their place to look and what actions they'd like to have taken there. And they then they can send it to a cleaner. A cleaner can follow the steps step by step. It's literally like painting by numbers, drawing by numbers. And you get pictures back, photos of your house, so you know how everything looks. So it's basically a workflow tool. It's a visual checklist that helps hosts, vacation rental owners, and property managers to better manage their properties remotely.
I like it. It looks really nice.
Yeah, and it's changed my life. I'm actually, as I speak, I'm sitting in the New Zealand countryside, and I just finished a turnover in San Francisco where I have one set of guests moving out and another set of guests moving in, and in 4 hours the place needs to be turned over, and I managed to manage all of that remotely from 8,000 miles away, which really makes my life much easier and much less stressful.
Yeah, that's very cool. I love the idea, and I agree with Seth. Looks like a very well executed app, and something that sounds like it could be very useful for a nice targeted group of users. And I think that's great. Let's jump into talking about Airbnb, because really that is the gist and the driver of what got you into using a lot of these smart home gadgets, at least in the way that you're currently using them. So take us back. You alluded to it a little bit in the introductory section here, but talk about when you first started connecting those dots in your head about using connected solutions in your Airbnb business.
Yeah, I mean, the key problem was that I'm not at my house when I'm hosting. So the house that I'm hosting from is my primary residence, but I travel a lot, so I host when I'm not there, which means I had to start automating a series of processes. The most obvious of those is how to let people into the property. So from there, I started looking at connected locks, at smart locks, and I'm using August for that. The second issue was informing guests about certain things. So I started building a couple of integrations. For instance, since I'm a geek, I'm using Philips Hue light bulbs all around the house. And one of the problems that I ran into very early, it's a very niche problem, but is the following. In San Francisco during the winter, we tend to have quite bad air quality. And I have a wood burning stove in my house, and almost every second day during the winter, it's a spare the air day, which means you're not allowed to use a wood burning stove. So the question for me became, how do I explain that to the guests if and when they can use the wood burning stove? So I built a simple integration using IFT that allows me that if this then that, it's basically middleware software that connects different connected devices. That allows me to automatically change the light bulb that is next to the wood burning stove to magenta on whenever I get a spare the air email, and I get automated emails from them, and that now tells the guest that they can't use the fireplace when the light is magenta. So it's little things that I built to make my life and their life easier.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's a great one. Jason and I have often scratched our heads live on the show of what you could do with if this and that, and that is a great use case. We tend to I don't know. I if this and that is one of those middleware programs, like you're saying, that for the side of the world we're in, it doesn't really offer that much benefit. But for what you just described, I think that's a great use case and a great way, to set up and automate something that is a little bit outside of the box. It's not like it's a door lock or anything like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's been the key driving principle for me, that I can't make my guests' life complicated. I have to make their life easy. So I have to sort of keep technology as much away from them as I can. So, and this is a good example of how to do that. They don't need to know anything about how IFT works or how a Philips Hue light bulb works. They just need to know that if a certain light turns a certain color, they shouldn't use the fireplace. And that's something very easy to explain, and it works for everyone. So that's the sort of the general principle that I've been trying to use around the house, to use home automation to make things easy, as opposed to adding a layer of complexity.
Yeah, and I can express to you that Jason and I are in exactly the same business. You can't make things overly complicated for the sake of complication, and because at the end of the day, I mean, I tell my clients this: when I'm installing an entertainment system, it's still at its core an entertainment system. When you are renting out your house as Airbnb, it's a vacation, so you don't want somebody stressing over technology when they get out there on vacation on a holiday, and worried about how to turn on and off the lights and that kind of thing.
That's exactly right. So and basically what I've been focusing on with my home automation strategy at home is to give guests optionality. I'll never make them rely on something, because some people just don't want to use technology, or their smartphone might be out of battery, or they might be international guests, so they're on a roaming plan and they don't want to pay a fortune to use a certain feature. So what I'm trying to do all around the house is I give them the option to use something, and I actually see that a lot of them are very curious. This is their first exposure to home automation, and they sort of walk away saying, hey, this is something I want to do in my home. But I never want to force them to use something.
Right.
So there's always a plan B. So whether that's for the August lock at the door, like I still have a lockbox with two old metal keys in it. So there's always sort of an old traditional way that anyone can use, and then if they want something that for them might be easier, then they can use home automation for it.
Excellent. And look, that's good to have a backup plan, especially when you're so many thousands of miles away.
Yeah, no, exactly.
How do you handle tech support issues do you just fall back on that plan B, or how does that work usually?
That's you're exactly right. I mean, I typically have a plan B and I have a plan C. And I think if you're far away, that's the only way to manage things, because things will go wrong. There's always something that goes wrong. Something runs out of batteries. Someone's phone is out of batteries. Or, there's always something. So I make sure that there is a plan B and a plan C. Sort of a good example is, again, with the August lock. I think 80% of guests actually really like it, and 20% don't like it or don't want to use it because it's too complicated for them. or they want to use it, but something goes wrong. So what I do is I've got a lockbox outside the house that they can always use and that has physical keys in it. And then just in case they lose the physical keys, which happens about 1 every 10 times, there's a second lockbox that's hidden away. And I can always give them access to the second one. Again, because the worst thing that can happen is someone comes home at 2 o'clock in the morning from after a bar crawl and has no idea where they left the key, and they can't get back into the house. So I have to have a way for them to get into the house no matter what.
That could be a serious problem. You got to think about the 2 a.m. bar crawler, without a doubt.
Exactly.
No, that's great. I think that I'm curious to hear you elaborate. You've hinted at it a little bit, but what is in your experience, what has the general reaction been from your guests? And clearly it's going to be across the board, but do you find that most people are into the idea of having this technology in their rental, or ambivalent, or maybe anti? What's been your experience?
My experience is that people really like it. There's sort of and this may have something to do with the Airbnb audience, but I always say there's something about voyeurism in staying at an Airbnb, because you really sort of get a peek into someone else's life and into someone else's home. And I see that quite a lot of times, that people actually take an interest in what they find in the house. And because they're not sort of in a situation where something's being sold to them, they browse, they explore, and they find new devices, and they find an interest in them. And then what I'll get afterwards is an email saying, "Hey, I saw this. Where can I buy it? How does it work? I really liked using it for 3 or 4 days. I want to have one myself now." So I think staying in someone else's home is a great opportunity to explore new things, and that's something that I've seen quite a bit with guests. And I'd say the overwhelming reaction has been very positive and one of curiosity.
I'm seeing like a new business model here. Like I could go get some vacation rentals and throw some technology in them, and then like sell that on the backside of those visits to the guests.
It's actually it's funny that you mention it, because I really thought about that. I must have sold a lot of thermostats for Nest so far, because that's actually, I have a Nest thermostat in the house, and I think it's a very different experience for people, whether they see that on the shelf at a Home Depot or at an Apple store, or whether they actually can see it and touch it and use it over a period of days. I think so. It's a great opportunity for people to get exposed to new product, and I think it's there should be a business somewhere there to work with companies like that and help them introduce products by putting them into vacation rentals and Airbnb homes.
Yeah, definitely. At the very least, you could set up like an Amazon affiliate program, right? And drive your guests to that link. Yeah. Hey, if you like these products, go use this link. And there you go. It's a little extra income affiliate business there. And
no, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. I think it's I think you're exactly right, though. The opportunity for people to get into an environment and actually use it in a real world situation, as opposed to maybe just seeing a demo on a website or even going to like a Best Buy. It's a very, very different experience. We've talked about a couple of the specific products that you use. I know you've alluded to Nest and August a couple of times. There was one, as we were getting prepared for the show, that I saw you mention that I'm curious for your thoughts on how you're using it and how your guests are reacting to it, and that is the Amazon Echo. What can you tell us about that one?
I think if there's a star in my home, it's Alexa, it's Amazon Echo. I think I usually don't tell guests about it, but as you know, it responds to when you say Alexa. And since my name's Alex, sooner or later, either guests calling me or something, it's quite possible that Alexa will pick it up and respond. And it's quite interesting sort of to hear people's reaction. I set it up so it can help with a few things. For instance, it's set so it tells guests what the current traffic to downtown is, or to Fisherman's Wharf, which are typical directions where they want to go in San Francisco. So it can become quite useful. Also, one of the things that I get quite a lot of is international travelers. So I often get families that travel with kids and that like to cook quite a bit. And Alexa is great at doing conversions. Like in my case, Amazon Echo Alexa sits in the kitchen. So if you want to know what 250 milliliters is in ounces, that's sort of a great application. Or one of the things that I tend to tell people about is to ask Alexa to tell them a joke. And sort of that usually breaks the ice. So, I always tell people that they can switch it off by hitting the mute button on it, because there is something a little bit unsettling about having a microphone listen to you all the time. But I don't think I've ever heard any guests doing that. So I want to make sure they have that option, but they seem to like it and they use it.
Very cool. Yeah, I absolutely love having the Alexa or the Echo sitting in the kitchen for both conversions and those really, really, really horrible dad jokes that it
exactly that make you cringe when you listen to them.
Yes, they are so bad.
No. I also have a few integrations, like for instance, in my case, I control the light, like the Philips Hue lights from Alexa, so it allows people to switch on and off the lights, so like do little things like that. So I think it's a great way for people that are interested to explore.
Right, and we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks that Amazon's really pushing into the home a little bit further, so that those integrations will get a lot easier for your guests to come in and say, "Hey, turn on the lights," and turn on all the lights. What other? I mean, you mentioned having the August Nest Alexa. What else do you have there in the house that your clients that are staying over at the Airbnb are going to eventually see, or maybe they don't see? What else do you have running the home?
I have moisture control, like basically for all the plants around the house. I use Flower Power, which is a product by Parrot, and that allows me to see remotely whether the plants need to be watered or not. That's something, before I used to regularly kill plants because either they got watered too often or they didn't get watered at all. So this is one that I have in the background that allows me sort of to manage that part. I have a Chamberlain garage door opener that allows me to control my garage door from my mobile phone and also remotely. So that's useful because sometimes I store a few things for the cleaner in the garage. The guests don't have access to the garage, but it allows me, if need be, to open the garage remotely and then for the cleaner to access supplies there. What else do I have? I have solar panels on the house, and I use a microinverter that tells me how much they're producing, so I get alerted if anything's wrong with the solar panels. I think that's mostly it. And then for my place in New Zealand, I use Rain Machine, which is smart irrigation that allows me to sort of tune the irrigation to what the weather is like and sort of ramp it up when it's been hot for a few days and turn it off when it rains. And also allows me to see if plants are doing all right and then sort of increase or decrease irrigation based on that.
Right. We've covered a couple of those different types of like ratio, and there's a couple of other ones that have been out there that have started appearing. It's a really cool technology because of the way here in Florida, at least, I'm drive down the road and I'll see somebody's sprinklers on full blast and it'll be pouring down rain at the same time. So it's a really neat way for anyone to actually integrate a really dumb feature of the home to actually give them a pretty good benefit of, keeping the water bill low and keeping your consumption low, but also, keeping the grass green. It is one of those things.
No, it's exactly that. And sort of once you start planting fruit trees and things, what typically happens is before I had a battery operated irrigation controller, and invariably the batteries run out at some point. And then for a month or so until I figured out nothing gets watered, and then it's too late. So now I basically see remotely what's going on. I sort of through the moisture sensor, I see whether they're doing all right or not, and I can adjust things accordingly. So that makes a big difference.
Right. I noticed when you were listing off all the devices, didn't really have any Apple HomeKit products listed in there. Do you have any thoughts on that particular program?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, as I said early on, I think there's a big race going on between who's at the center of the connected home, between sort of there's 3 or 4 different companies that I'd like to be at the center. Apple obviously is one of them. Google is another. Personally, I sort of, as a venture investor, I looked at the space also from an investment perspective relatively closely. And my favorite approach to it is third-party solutions that connect everything to everything as opposed to being part of one ecosystem or the other. So that's why I'm quite partial to if this then that, because it allows me, I think it's sort of the most versatile solution and allows me to connect anything to anything as opposed to being locked into someone's ecosystem.
Right. And I think that makes sense. I'm curious to hear you elaborate a little on that, because a big part of what Seth and I do as home technology professionals and guys who are out there installing systems like maybe a Control4 or a Savant, part of the value proposition there is bringing things into a unified app, into a single app, to try and make things at least a little bit easier. And it doesn't sound like you've been having any issue at all with using all of the sort of standalone apps and using if this then that as kind of the glue that binds them together. Do you find that as a pain point at all? As clearly you're pretty a power user when it comes to smart home technology. Do you have any issue with sort of jumping in between apps? Do you find that as a pain point? Wish there was something more overarching, or are you okay with that?
I think it's really early days in the industry, so I think there will be solutions that are much more overarching than what we currently have. But I think because it's early days, it's still sort of the fight between the big ecosystems, the Googles of the world, the Apples of the world, and maybe Cisco will emerge as one also on the consumer space. And I think it's too early to be locked into one of them because typically most devices work with one or the other, but not all of them. So I'm quite happy with connecting them myself to the extent I need to. I mean, of course, I'd love to. It's a really clumsy approach right now. I mean, if I sort of think how August connects back through a different device and how Nest connects through a different device, it's quite clumsily implemented right now. But I think it's early days, and sooner or later the dust will settle, and there will be one standard for all of them to connect to each other. And I hope that standard will be outside the ecosystems, like outside sort of Apple or Google or something that's owned by one company versus another.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. And I think you use the word clumsy, but at the end of the day, it's working for you, and clearly it's providing value to you in terms of what you're trying to do with your Airbnb business. So I think it's great. I was just curious to hear what your thoughts were on having that overarching app that might allow you to bring everything into one interface. As sort of a dovetail off of that question, we've talked about a lot of the specific products rather that you're currently using. Are there any specific solutions that jump to your mind as an Airbnb host that you wish were out there but just don't currently exist?
Yeah, I mean, there was one that like door cams, I think, is an interesting category. I stay away from cameras as much as I possibly can because I think once you have other people stay in your house, there's something very, very weird about having cameras around the house. So there's no cameras in my house. I have a camera in the garage, which is not accessible for guests, and that's for security purposes. I think door cams is a category that's interesting, and there's been quite a few moves in that space. So I'm looking forward to seeing the door cam by August soon. So that's a category that I'm interested in. Airbnb has started some limited integration with some products. I think so far it's very, very early steps, but I think it's interesting. For instance, right now with my August door lock, I can send an electronic key automatically to the guest that made the reservation. It's very, very early days, and the UI is not quite right, and the options that I have are not quite there. The number one use case that I see for the August electronic lock is to give a key to every guest, i.e. to issue multiple keys, and that's not something that's currently possible. But I think there's some interesting integration with third-party platforms, for instance, with cleaning services or with Airbnb when it comes to giving people access to your home. One area that I think's been badly lacking so far is smoke detectors. I was a very early adopter of Nest solution, and if there's ever been a disappointment for me, I love Nest, but their smoke detector I think was a complete disaster, and they then subsequently I think pulled it from the market and then relaunched it. What happened in my case is a speck of dust got into it, and that triggered an alert. But it wasn't just an alert. It basically was something that the smoke detector determined was a real fire. So no matter what I did, it wouldn't stop sounding the alarm. And then to make matters worse, since they all mesh networked, all of them started sounding the alarm. And the only way
that's not good.
Well, actually, it got much worse. This was 3 minutes before I was supposed to hop on a conference call. So all of them went off, all 7 of them. And the only solution to getting them to shut up was to take 4 screws out of each of them and remove the batteries. So I had to climb up a ladder 7 times, find a Phillips screwdriver, remove the backplate, and take the batteries out. And there was literally no other way to silence the alarm. So that's sort of one of those ways where you're trying to solve a small problem and you end up creating a very, very big problem instead.
Right. Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of options in that space in particular, and I do think the Nest product has had certainly its fair share of missteps, and I think it is a product category that makes a lot of sense to see more evolution there, and I'll be curious to keep an eye on it. I want to zoom out here, and we'll kind of start to wrap up the interview more high level. And when I look at what you've done with home technology and what I think is interesting and why the main reason why I wanted to bring you on and have a conversation is I see this essentially as what you've come up with is a vertically integrated solution set for Airbnb hosts. You've cobbled it together yourself and you've made it work piecemeal. But at the end of the day, that is really what you've come up with is a very targeted set of solutions that are very valuable to you as an Airbnb host. And I'm curious to get your thoughts as somebody who's very into the smart home and follows the space. Do you see the smart home evolving to include more of these sort of vertically integrated solutions? And one of the specific examples to illustrate what I'm talking about that I think about a lot is things like elder care and maybe aging in place. Do you see smart home technology having a role to play in these very specific vertical markets?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's I'm sort of very much on the early adopter side, but I do think that a number of those solutions are ready for prime time now. And I think there's some huge opportunities for remotely either managing properties or remotely monitoring or helping people. So I think there's big opportunities in the space. And I've been very, very excited about developments just over the last 2 years. And I think it's becoming quite clear where this is heading and how much of an opportunity this can provide to people. I mean, in my case, so if you think about it, it's a pretty amazing situation that I can sit in the New Zealand countryside right now and have the peace of mind that everything at my home works smoothly and I can let people in and out remotely and I can monitor that the batteries in different devices are working and I can sort of make that process so much more seamless from far away. That's been a huge difference for me, and I think it will be for many other vacation rental owners and home sharing hosts.
Interesting. So as an early adopter and what I would call a pretty extreme power user of this technology, what are your thoughts on like what needs to happen? I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, where you were saying there needs to be some kind of standard that doesn't lock you down to an ecosystem. But what do you think needs to happen in this space that you would like to see it happen in this space? I guess I should say, where it evolves past people like you and I, where it evolves past this early adoption phase.
I think to me, it's really two things. The first thing is I think most of the devices that I have in my home work 80% of the time, or maybe 90% of the time. And when I say work, that's a combination between the device not working for one reason or another, it disconnects from the network, or the batteries are out, or sort of any of like what might even be a legitimate reason, like nothing related to a product fault. The other part of that percentage is just user adoption, that people find it too hard to use. So first thing that has to happen is we need to get to devices that work 100% reliably all the time with all users. And I think we're still quite a ways away from that. Until that time, it's a really nice gadget. It's a nice to have, but it's something that can make life easier, but you can't ever rely on. For instance, I wouldn't rely on my August lock as the only way to let people into my house. There needs to be a plan B. So that's one thing we have to get from 80% to 100%. The second thing is they have to be easier to network with each other, to connect to each other, and to control. And I think the writing's on the wall that the sort of universal control device will be the mobile phone. Now we just sort of have to get to the next step and make sure that there's sort of that there's one app or sort of a couple of connected apps that allow you to control all devices seamlessly. And sort of make permissioning and the connection factor much better. The last one, it's like I know I said two, so I'm adding a third to that. The last one is I think people haven't really thought very much about security, and sort of because we're so early in the game, that hasn't been a big topic yet. But I think there are a lot of things to think about. What happens if someone else gets access to my home? What happens if someone else, sort of people use drop cans for monitoring the dog or babies at home? What happens if someone else gets access to those cameras? So there's a lot of security questions that need to be solved.
Right.
So I think it's very early days. It's exciting early days, but there's a long road ahead of us.
Sure. Yeah, great answer. Really enjoyed the conversation. I like I've said, I think it's a very interesting application of smart home technology, and I applaud you for your resourcefulness, and we'll be curious to stay in touch with you moving forward and as the smart home evolves, and would love to hear back from you on how you continue to evolve the use of smart home in your personal life and business. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on and join us. If our listeners are curious about connecting with you and finding out more about what you do, or possibly properly as well, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I'm very happy to answer any questions. My email address is alex, A-L-E-X, at getproperly.com. And then, sort of for me, the ultimate remote home control of application is obviously my own app, Properly. So anybody who would like to use that app, download this app. It's available for free for iOS and Android devices worldwide, and you can get that at getproperly.com. And would very much like to hear any feedback, and very happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for taking the time to come on and join us on the Home Tech Podcast, Alex. We will let you go.
Great. Thanks very much for having me.
All right. Take care.
Bye.